In chapter 18, we were introduced to the concept of passive voice for verbs through the first and second conjugation and looking at the present, imperfect, and future tenses. In chapter 19, we're going to look at the perfect passive system for all verbs. If you remember back to when we first had perfect tenses, perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect, in the active voice, every one of those is regular, meaning that if a verb is one of the perfect tenses, it follows one set of rules and that's it. There are no differences between future tenses for different conjugations or anything like that. The perfect system is regular, and it's regular in the passive as well. So remember, passive verbs are they're the recipient of the action instead of the performers of that action. So instead of saying I love you, you could say you were loved by me, right? In the second sentence, you are receiving that love instead of actually performing or something like that, performing the action of loving. Okay. Now, for the perfect passives, how to form them? It's pretty easy. All you do is you take the fourth part of your verb. And like I told you, we need to know our parts to our verbs. This is why I've had you memorize the 4 parts to a verb this entire time. The fourth part of your verb, and you add it to a form of sum esse, of to be. Okay. And the different tenses of sum are going to be used depending on which tense you have. So you would use the present tense of to be for perfect passive. The imperfect of to be would be used for pluperfect, and the future forms of to be would be used for future perfect. And you'll see what those are again as we get to the charts here below, but the words are separate. So the fourth part of your verb is going to be separate from that form of to be. Okay. For these, the fourth part of the verb has to agree with the subject. So whatever the subject of the sentence is, in gender, number, and in case, just like an adjective would. The nice thing is because the verb has to agree with your subject, this whole thing is, it's going to agree, but it's always going to be nominative case. Always. Because it's agreeing with your subject. So that makes it a little bit easier. So, what does this look like in Latin? If we take just the perfect passive, you may want to write this down here, but what I'm giving you is what it would look like in the Latin, and then what it would look like in English on the right. So all you do is you take that fourth part of, and this is for the verb to love, so amo, amare, amawi, amatus, and to it you add a form of to be. For perfect passive, remember we're using the present tense forms of to be. So we would have sum, es, est, sumus, estis, and sunt. Separate, these are separate words. Amatus is used for the singular ones, obviously, because os, a, those are singular nominatives. And then in the plural, we're using e, I, and a. The plural of those adjective charts, because obviously in the plural, our subjects are plural. So sum es est, sumus estis sunt, amatus sum, or amatasum, or amatum sum, depending on what your subject is there, is going to be I was loved, or I have been loved. I don't really know how you would use neuter there. Amatus es, you were loved. He, she, or it was loved or has been loved. Amatus est, and then we are, you are, they are loved. There you see sumus, estis, and sunt. So you're still getting your subject from your form, from your final verb form, and you can tell there which one's your subject. Or you can have something that's in the nominative. That could also be your subject. Okay, but you want to use was or were loved or have been or has been loved to get that perfect sense there. Okay, don't confuse this with the imperfect, which would be was or were, or don't confuse it and try and make this say, I am loved because you have a present tense form of to be there, or he, she, or it is loved just because those are present. You have to take this whole thing together. Okay, amatus or amatus sum ss, and then so on. Okay, you have to take it as a unit, right? This is one of the important things: is reading your sentences, reading them fully. Okay, you might want to write this whole thing down here for the perfects before we move on to pluperfect. The pluperfect. Okay, again, you're going to use had. Okay, so I had been loved, or you had been loved, he, she, or it had been loved, we had, you had, they had been loved. To form it, it's the forms of your fourth part of your verb again, amatus, or amati, amatai, amata, and you just take it and you add the imperfect form of to be to it. So eram, amatus eram, I had been loved. Eras, erat, eramus, eratus, and erant. Okay. Imperfect form with pluperfect. Again, making sure that we use singular when our subject's singular and plural when our subject is plural. Okay. Future perfect, same exact process. Amatus or amati I. I will have been loved. You will have been loved. He, she, or it will have been loved. And then all you do is you add your future forms of to be with it. Ero, eris, erit, erimus, eritis, and erunt. Again, same process, singular verbs with your singular subject, plural verbs with your plural subjects. Again, the biggest thing with this is to make sure that you realize and read the full sentence. When you see the fourth part of your verbs, you might have to go back and brush up on the fourth part of your verbs. Look at those and look at that with the form of to be together. That will tell you your tense. Don't be tempted to just say, oh, these are future because these are future tense forms. So I will be or you will be, right? You need the thing together, which will tell you then that it's passive. Moving on. Interrogative pronouns and interrogative adjectives are touched on in this chapter. For the most part, they're very similar to the relative pronoun. They're just used for questions. Okay, so an interrogative pronoun is in some way asking, this is sort of like general, this is for general question, not specific. Also, what will help you tell that it's the interrogative pronoun instead of interrogative adjective is there will be, no noun to go with it. Okay, so general question, it's not specific, it's not asking for a specific person, and there's no noun there. And if you look here, what do we have? For the most part, these are the exact forms of the relative pronoun, except we have quis, which is used for both masculine and feminine there. But besides that, it's cuius, cui, quem, instead of quem or quam, and then quo, quid instead of quod, and then that makes that quid here too. Okay, and then the whole plural form, the plural chart, is exactly the same as the relative pronoun here, if you look at it. The way to tell is that there's not going to be a noun with it. That will tell you it's the interrogative pronoun. So if we look at sentences here, like quid vides, you have you as your verb, you see, and then quid is, neuter and noun. So we would say something simply like, what do you see? Right? There's no noun there, so it's just asking for some basic what thing do you see, right? Instead of looking for something specific like what book do you see? Same thing here, we have quis. Okay, so it's going to be, who has a plan. We're not saying, you know, what specific person, just who out of everyone has a plan there. Okay, so noticing that there isn't another noun that's going with these should be helpful. Looking at the interrogative adjective, okay, this is asking for more specific identification of a specific, you know, person or thing. The nice thing is the forms are identical in every single way to the relative pronoun. So qui, quod, quod, quis, 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 so on and so forth. Exactly the same. If we look at our sentences here, you have vides again, so it's you see, and we have quod, which is neuter, and signum, which is neuter, and those are going together. So it's, you know, what sign do you see? In the sentence above, we just had quid vides, like what thing do you see? There's no other noun there. There's no noun there to go with it. Whereas here we have signum that's going with quod. So what sign do you see? Same thing in the second one. We have in qua urbe, and qua is going with urbe. So here again we have our interrogative adjective here because you have a noun going with the relative. Still, it's just going to be in, you know, in what city are we living, or do we live? In what city or what kind of city are we living? It's a question, so that's where we get the interrogative. And then qua, right, is going with urbe. Right? So really the only difference between an interrogative pronoun and an interrogative adjective is the presence of a noun when we're talking about an interrogative adjective. It's going to take some time and practice to understand the difference between the two, but it's really not that complicated. Just knowing that you need to translate both of them as who, what, or which, and just be on the lookout for a noun if it's an interrogative adjective.